For most of us, our home is our largest financial investment. But there's word tonight that depending on where you live, the value of that home may drop another 5 to 10%. That's in part because foreclosures are expected to peak this year. Correspondent James Rosen has that story.
More grim numbers on the home front. The annual report from RealtyTrack, the leading monitor of foreclosed properties, reveals banks repossessed more than 1 million homes in 2010. More than 2.8 million homes last year received some kind of foreclosure filing, a mortgage default notice, an auction scheduling, or a bank repossession, an increase of nearly 2% over 2009 and 23% over 2008. With unemployment still over 9% and more homeowners falling behind on mortgages or finding their homes underwater, worth less than the amount owed on them, RealtyTrack sees the crisis reaching a new low.
The market has to bottom. We have to start clearing out this distressed inventory if the housing market's ever going to come back. So in history, we're going to look back at 2011 and say that was when we finally began the recovery.
If, as RealtyTrack suggests, 2011 proves another record year for foreclosures, it will further depress the value even of those homes that are not underwater. You might pay your mortgage on time, but if your neighbor forecloses, it tends to reduce the value of your home too, and it tends to make banks less likely to sign off on home equity loans, even for responsible homeowners.
With all the banks making everything more difficult, it's not only a question of demand, but can they go through the hurdles, any buyer, to get the home, even if they want a home?
The last 2 months actually saw the rate of foreclosure slow in the wake of the so-called robo-signing scandal, in which major lenders, including J.P. Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Ally, and Wells Fargo, were alleged to have processed tens of thousands of foreclosures in assembly line fashion, often with flawed paperwork. That, coupled with the rampant buying and selling and repackaging of mortgages as securities, has brought on a blizzard of state and federal investigations, with courts now often unable to establish who even owns a given title. But as banks resume evictions, the supply glut will worsen before it eases.
Consider that the unsold market right now is over 4 million. That's way more than an entire year's worth of inventory out there. So we've got a lot to go before this housing crisis gets better.
For the 4th straight year, Nevada posted the highest foreclosure rate in the country last year, when 1 in 11 households there received a foreclosure notice of some kind. For the 2nd year in a row, Arizona came in second, with Florida rounding out the top 3, or should I say, Brett, the lower 3.
All right, James, thank you.
I believe that we will see more foreclosures, and I think personally that 2011 will be the greatest foreclosure year. It will surpass 2010. You know, even though that seems almost impossible, I believe it will surpass 2010.
There's an overhang of about 700,000 bank properties that are not yet on the market.
Consider that the unsold market right now is over 4 million. That's way more than an entire year's worth of inventory out there. So we've got a lot to go before this housing crisis gets better.
Foreclosures, staggering, almost 2.9 million in 2010. That is up 2% from 2009, up 23% from 2008. And as you just heard there, 2011 promises, unfortunately, to be a bigger year for foreclosures. What about this and the economy? We're back with the panel. Jonah, what does this tell us about what's ahead?
It tells us that 2011 is going to be a very rough year, because the only way you sort of really get through this is if you get the unemployment rate down, and one of the ways you get the unemployment rate down is to get the housing industry back. There's a real nasty catch-22 to it, and at the end of the day, it seems that the only way you get through this is you just have to purge out the bad properties, the bad mortgages, and all of the rest. One of the reasons why next year is going to be worse than this, or 2011 is going to be worse than 2010, is because of the freeze in all of the foreclosures that we had because of this robocalling scandal and all of the rest. So they're all going to get pushed into 2011, and we just got to get the poison out of the system.
Juan, banks are holding a lot of properties. They're not even on the market yet.
Right. Well, some of it's still in legal tangle because the courts have to make a decision as to what's legally held and what's not legally held. But Jonah's point is exactly right. You got to clear out this distressed inventory and then move forward. And the trick here is, as you move forward, to have consumers and the banks find some semblance of balance, that the banks believe in the consumer's ability to pay and set reasonable terms for mortgages and for equity loans, and that the consumers actually have the capacity to pay. And the people that I hold so guilty in all of this, the rating agencies actually perform their function.
So the calls that we saw before the election, largely we predicted tied to the election for foreclosures to continue to be frozen and for the effort to stop foreclosures, they'll come to an end.
No, that has stopped. You know, and that was a response, by the way, from the administration to conservative calls to say this is there's no excuse for this kind of interference in the market, and it will slow our economic recovery.
Charles.
Look, it's an ironic and a sad fact, but the lower the prices go, the sooner they hit bottom, and the sooner the market will clear, the sooner we're going to be able to actually rebuild. You know, the administration, out of a humane impulse, had a program called HAMP, which was supposed to help those who were going to lose their houses, but unfortunately, it has not been successful. The projections in mid-year were that 3 out of every 4 people who were on this HAMP assistance would end up losing the house anyway. And it's a way of slowing down the market. I think the boil has to be lanced. It's going to happen in 2011, and I think it'll allow a recovery afterwards. But you know, if you're losing a house and the family's going to suffer, it's no consolation that economically it's necessary.
Well, especially because so many Americans put their value, their wealth, into their home, Jonah.
Yeah, no, the psychological role of housing is just enormous, and there's an argument that the housing market is still overvalued. I would say that, getting onto the politics of this, that it does tee up very nicely for the Republicans a series of very important hearings on reforming Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which are essentially insolvent if it weren't for the $150 billion bailout, and they have $5 trillion of mortgages on their books. Their common shares of stocks have dropped 99% in value, and that was a direct result of policies, at least I would argue, that came over the last few years led by Democrats, and that argument needs to be had. It kind of has not happened in a proper way yet.
Congressman Issa is going to be leading one investigation into that. That's it for the panel, but stay tuned for something we cringe at in this business.